As with many things in life, context is everything, and when it comes to photography, this is especially true. How many times have we seen innocent-looking photographs that have a much darker meaning behind them when we know the full story? They could be happy-looking people who are hiding secrets, or criminals who appear normal on the outside whilst fighting their inner demons on the inside. Well, in this video, we'll be taking a look at a selection of photographs that are hiding disturbing backstories that without them, you wouldn't know existed. As always, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. The Incredibly Stupid One. On April 6, 1967, while aboard the USS Canberra in the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War, second-class petty officer Douglas Hegdal was knocked overboard by the blast from a 5-inch gun mount. He managed to swim and tread water for several hours before being picked up by Vietnamese fishermen. He was listed as missing as a result of being lost at sea, and this was his official Navy photograph. Later that same day, the fishermen handed Douglas over to Vietnamese militiamen. He was severely beaten by them before they moved him to the notorious How Lo prison. Initially, his interrogators believed him to be a commando or agent, and they thought his claim that he was blown overboard was far too fetched. Douglas had to think fast to survive and make himself less valuable to his captors, so he decided to act dumb and pretended to be of low intelligence. For several days, he was physically maltreated, until he finally convinced his captors that he was of little value for their propaganda campaign. When asked to write statements against the United States, he agreed, but claimed he was unable to read or write. Thinking they had someone who could be easily manipulated to their cause, his captors assigned someone to teach Douglas how to read. However, after he seemed incapable of learning anything, his teachers gave up on him. Later, he became known to the Vietnamese as the Incredibly Stupid One, and he was given almost free run of the POW camp. Douglas, who was actually highly intelligent, went on to play a crucial role in identifying as many of the US prisoners who were held at the prison, many who were previously presumed dead. The US captives used the 7-note musical couplet known as "Shave and a Haircut" as a code to authenticate a new prisoner's US identity. They would tap the first 5 notes against a cell wall and wait for the appropriate response. Using this tap code, US POWs were able to communicate securely with one another, and with the help of fellow prisoner Joseph Krecker, a US Air Force officer, Douglas managed to memorize their names, capture dates, method of capture, and personal information of around 256 other prisoners. At one point, he also convinced his captors that he needed new glasses, and when he was taken into the city of Hanoi to have them fitted, he memorized the route. Because Douglas was seemingly no use to his captors, he was one of 3 POWs, along with Navy Lieutenant Robert Frischman and Air Force Captain Wesley Rumble, who were released on August 5, 1969, as a propaganda move by the North Vietnamese. It was unusual for American prisoners of war to agree to early release, however they made an exception for Douglas, and he was ordered to accept the release, so that he could provide the names of POWs being held by the North Vietnamese and reveal the conditions in which they were being subjected to. This photograph was taken of Douglas after his release. It showed him as gaunt and emaciated after 2.5 years of captivity, looking incredibly different to the sailor who sailed out to serve his country. However, this was the photo of a genius who had fooled the enemy into believing he was the Incredibly Stupid One, a lesson in never judging the book by the cover. When Douglas finally returned to the United States, he was able to provide many names of military and intelligence personnel who were previously thought to be dead. In 1970, he made a significant impact when he confronted the Vietnamese during the Paris peace talks, where he shared crucial information about the prison camps, including their locations and the inhumane conditions of the prisoners, as well as the torture practices used by the Vietnamese. Exposing the Vietnamese in this manner led them to keep POWs alive until the end of the war, saving hundreds of lives. Family photos. Take a look at this series of photographs. They're nothing remarkable, just some sweet memories of a father and his daughter as she grows up. On fishing trips, birthdays, and as a proud dad, giving away his daughter at her wedding. However, you'd be wrong to think there is anything normal here. The dad in these photographs is Dennis Lynn Rader, also known as BTK, an abbreviation he gave himself for bind, torture and kill. He was an American serial killer who murdered at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991 in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Rader's daughter, his son and his wife, who lived with him for 34 years, had no idea they were living with this psychopath. They knew him only as the loving father and husband depicted in the photographs. Rader married Paula Dietz on May 22, 1971, and they had 2 children, Kerry and Brian. He was a respected member of the community and was a member of Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita and had been elected president of the church council. He was also a Cub Scout leader. His murder spree started in January 1974 when he murdered 4 members of the Otoro family in Wichita, Kansas. His MO was to acquire souvenirs from his victims, and on this occasion he took a watch. 4 months later, he murdered 21-year-old Catherine Doreen Bright after breaking into her home. Later that year, he wrote a note detailing the Otero family murders and saying the code words for me will be bind them, torture them and kill them, BTK. He left the note in a book at the Wichita Public Library, and it was eventually recovered by the police. Over the next 20 years, Rader killed at least 5 more women. However, he was getting irritated by the lack of media coverage for his crimes. He craved attention, and so he sent a letter to a local TV station saying, "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" It would be 8 years before he struck again, when he murdered Maureen Hedge. He murdered once more after Maureen, and then the case went cold. However, in 2004, on the 30th anniversary of Rader's first murders, a local newspaper speculated that the killer had either died or been imprisoned. To prove neither of these things were true, Rader sent a reporter items belonging to his 9th victim, Maureen Hedge. These included a copy of her driving license and photographs of her body. For the next year, he continued sending various packages to the media to prove he was still around. He used cereal boxes to send drawings, photographs and souvenirs from his crimes with written descriptions of his murders, and even sent dolls posed to mimic his victims. It's believed the cereal boxes were a reference to him being a serial killer. In January 2005, the police made a significant breakthrough in their investigation. They found a cereal box that contained a note written by the killer. In the note, Rader asked whether the police would be able to trace a floppy disk he wanted to send them. Law enforcement officials responded through a classified ad, indicating that it would be safe for him to send the disk. Rader did so, and the police were able to trace the disk back to his church. His DNA was then matched to samples found at the first crime scene, and he was arrested in February 2005. He readily confessed to his crimes, and in June of the same year, he pled guilty. 2 months later, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, and is currently incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. We'll be doing a Murderous Minds on Dennis soon, over on our Murderous Minds YouTube channel, so be sure to go over there and subscribe so you do not miss out. Adelir Anotonio de Carli. In April 2008, Father Adelir Anotonio de Carli, a Brazilian priest, attempted to break the world record for a clustered balloon flight. His aim was to publicize his plan to build a spiritual rest stop for lorry drivers. He attached hundreds of helium balloons to a chair and took off from the southern port city of Paranga. This photograph shows the father waving as he is about to take off. He reached an altitude of 20,000 feet before dropping to 8,200 feet to continue his journey to Dorados, which was 462 miles northwest of his starting point. Despite taking numerous safety precautions such as wearing a survival suit, selecting a buoyant chair, and packing a satellite phone and GPS, he forgot a vital part of his otherwise meticulous preparations. In a phone call he made during the flight, he stated that he needed help to use the GPS so he could relay his position to rescuers. This oversight proved to be fatal. Approximately 8 hours after launch, he lost radio contact with the port authorities and was reported missing. His rescuers were unable to locate him when he was blown out to sea and unable to give his location. Tragically, his body was not found for more than 2 months. While Father de Carli's faith and optimism were admirable, his attempt to fly using balloons was not successful, and he paid the ultimate price. Although he did succeed in drawing attention to his trucker's spiritual way station, although not in the way he intended. Burst of joy. On October 27, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Sturm's plane was shot down over Hanoi while he was leading a mission to bomb the area. He survived the crash, but was captured by the Vietnamese army and kept as a POW until March 14, 1973. On his return to the US, this photograph was taken, of him reuniting with his family after 5 years in North Vietnam. The photo, known as Burst of Joy, was awarded a Pulitzer Prize and became a symbol of the end of US involvement in the Vietnam War. It represented the hope that military personnel and their families could finally start to heal after the traumatic experiences they had endured during the brutal conflict. However, the happy image was not all it seemed to be. 3 days before it was taken, Sturm received a letter from his wife Loretta, who was also in the photograph, informing him that their marriage was over. It was later revealed that Loretta had been with other men throughout her husband's captivity, and had even received marriage proposals from 3 of them. So despite the photograph appearing to be a happy reunion, it was in fact the end of family life as he knew it. In 1974, the Sturms divorced, and Loretta remarried. If this wasn't bad enough for Robert, he still legally had to provide Loretta with 43% of his military retirement pay. Also during his captivity, Loretta spent $140,000 of his salary, and after their divorce, she got the house, their 2 young children, and $300 a month in child support. Robert ended up living with his mother and stated that he never displayed the award-winning photo, saying that he could not bring himself to look at it. He was quoted as saying, "I survived the torture, the mock executions, the dread-filled days and nights, so I could return to her, only to be handed a Dear John letter by a chaplain upon my release." In today's image-conscious world, where everyone tries to portray their perfect lives on social media, it's important to remember that, like the Burst of Joy photograph, things are not always as they seem. McArthur Wheeler. On April 15, 1995 in Pittsburgh, USA, word spread about 2 bank robberies that took place in broad daylight. However, the gang that orchestrated the robberies wasn't a gang at all, it was just 2 men, McArthur Wheeler and Clifton Earl Johnson. This image shows Wheeler brazenly walking up to the bank teller with a gun in his hand. He wore no disguise, and his face is clearly visible on CCTV footage. In his deluded mind, he and Johnson believed they had gotten away with daylight robbery. Neither robber attempted to disguise themselves. Instead, they applied lemon juice to their faces. According to Wheeler, Johnson had told him that lemon juice would make them invisible to security cameras, similar to how it functions as invisible ink. Although initially skeptical, Wheeler had tested this method by covering his face with lemon juice and capturing an image of it with a Polaroid camera. As he was missing from the resulting photograph, he trusted the method to be effective. However, detectives believed his absence in the image was caused either by a bad film, a maladjusted camera, or Wheeler having unintentionally pointed the camera away from his face. Johnson was soon arrested, but Wheeler was still at large, so the clear surveillance photograph of him was broadcast on Crime Stoppers and led to his arrest less than an hour later. When shown the photographs, Wheeler was shocked and exclaimed, "But I wore the lemon juice. I wore the lemon juice." The robberies directly inspired the research into the Dunning-Kruger effect, which suggests that individuals with little ability in a given field tend to overestimate their competence in it. This was certainly the case for Wheeler and Johnson. Not any old grid. This next image appears to show an old drainage grid or ancient skylight. However, this is no ordinary grid. This is the trapdoor leading to the dreaded medieval torture chamber known as the oubliette. Located at Warwick Castle in the UK, the oubliette is an ancient claustrophobic cell that prisoners were thrown into and forgotten about. The only way in or out was the trapdoor that was agonizingly out of reach of the prisoner once they found themselves in the narrow passage that wasn't even wide enough for them to sit down or even get down on their knees. The only option the prisoner had was to stand or lie prone until he was put out of his misery by starving to death. The unfortunate victim would be lowered into the deep shaft by a guardsman, and once they reached the bottom, the rope would have been taken up and the trapdoor above them would close shut. Food and water might have been thrown down to them if they were lucky, or if their survival was seen to be important. It was a truly horrible punishment, and more often than not, prisoners were abandoned completely and left to die in agonizing pain. This castle contains a particularly nasty example of the oubliette. It is long, narrow and horizontal, paved with jagged stones that protrude from the floor. Prisoners would be forced to lie on these stones, with the ceiling just inches above them, making it impossible to escape from the agony of their confinement. It's fair to say that medieval Britain was a harsh time to be alive. If you want to find out more about the medieval world, then head on over to our medieval channel, Medieval Madness. It'll remind you of how lucky we are to live in today's world. So that's it for this video. We have discovered tons of photographs on the internet that are not what they seem, so if you'd like us to do another similar video, let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.